Dr. Amir Kalali was named numerous times by Pharma Voice magazine as one of its 100 most inspiring leaders. You're going to find out why, in life sciences as voted by his peers. His work in neuroscience and pharma has driven him to be one of the most esteemed experts, hence my selection for choosing this session.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you.
We'll move on quickly. Now, we know we're running a bit late, so we'll see if we're interesting and we get to Q&A. If we interested you, you can ask us more Q&A or you can run to the drinks, okay? So we'll go based on what we can do. What I'm going to do is I'm very happy to have Georgia Mitzi here. I'm going to ask her to tell us about herself today to talk about digital in pharma. Because Jill, I don't think we're slow. I think pharma's been super fast. We're ahead of the curve. It's not true. We're probably the slowest industry for digitization, right? And there's reasons for that. And we're going to kind of have a real discussion about that today. So we have a journey in pharma and different people in different places in that journey. So Georgia, just tell us about yourself, what your background is, why have I got you on stage, why do I want to interview you?
Of course. First of all, happy to be here. I am super excited to have the chance to be interviewed by you. I'm super excited to share with you all my experience trying to inspire the innovation within pharma. So I'm originally from Greece. That's why you hear this exotic accent. I have been in the US for the past 15 years. I'm a biologist. I have my master's in cytogenetics and my PhD in pharmacoepidemiology. And I have an MBA in international business. I have primarily spent all my career either in one side of the fence or the other, meaning either working for the pharmaceutical industry or doing healthcare consulting for pharmaceutical companies. Currently, I am working at Sunovion, where I'm leading the digital healthcare initiatives. And before that, for the past 4 years, I had my own company in the digital healthcare space. So I definitely have lots of things to share.
So you've been on the entrepreneur side, now on the farms. Maybe some people may not know who Sunovion is. Maybe you can explain the parent company.
Yes, of course. So Sunovion is a medium-sized company. It's located in Marlborough, Massachusetts, but our parent company is Sumitomo Dynapon, which is a Japanese company. Our big blockbuster drug is Latuda, which is for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and we definitely have an interest in neurology and a very interesting portfolio in COPD.
So tell me about where you think pharma is in this journey of discovery into digitization.
Shouldn't we share a little bit more about you first? So for example, I do have a question, if I may.
Sure.
Why are you wearing these pink socks?
Oh, the pink socks. How many people here know what pink socks are? Anyone know here what that is? Okay, you'll learn something new, only a couple of people. I would encourage you, if you're anything to do with healthcare, to go online and just put in pink socks or do a hashtag on Twitter, and you'll discover a whole range of individuals who are really trying to make healthcare better, and they do it through donating pink socks at meetings, and it's good. You have friends all over the world, and we try and wear it when we're on stage and all that. So if you're not aware of it, it's a great community. It's really people trying to make healthcare better. So it's very inclusive. I would really encourage you to kind of look at that and find out more about it. There's some really nice write-ups about it that explain what's behind it. It's a very good ethos behind it.
Thank you for sharing that,
Sure.
but I do have another reason why I asked you that question, which is very relevant to what we're discussing today about digital innovation. So I think that innovation should be supported by positivity, and the whole notion behind the pink socks is think positive and make people smile. Innovation is definitely a very complicated thing to do, especially in a highly regulated environment. Therefore, needs to be embraced by positivity and people who are willing to find the answers. So one of the biggest challenges that I am currently facing, coming from the entrepreneurial side and now being part in the pharmaceutical industry, is that as an entrepreneur, you start with a big dream and you are full of positivity and energy to find all the right answers. So in a sense, it's a little bit of you are in some kind of delirium in a sense, because it's all about there is nothing stopping me. I need to find the answer because actually there's no turning back, either make it or break it. In pharma, there is a totally different kind of thinking. That they think when you come in front with an idea that seems very logical and the value proposition is clear, pharma's first reaction is, no, we cannot do it for a million reasons. Because a regulatory pathway is not clear, because reimbursement is not there, because we need to persuade the clinical development folks and then the commercial side of the organization. And basically, the whole situation is being heavily complicated by a million of gatekeepers. So by the time, if ever, you're successful and you pass all these gatekeepers, most probably the technology will become irrelevant.
So how have you tried to approach that?
So right now I'm testing different approaches because that's the way.
As a good scientist, you're experimenting, okay?
So I have tried the very aggressive approach where, because I know this field very well and I know which technologies might be a very good fit for our portfolio and our organization. So my very aggressive approach, it was, this is what we should do, let's do it. That's it. I figure out that when you're trying to, in a sense, shove into people's throat other ideas, they tend to close up, and especially when it comes to new things, they're not willing to listen. So this approach does not work. Then there is the approach that I also tried that I don't think that it can be also successful, is the approach of being inclusive and kind of developing this hands-holding kind of culture. And I will tell you why that does not work, because it's almost impossible to have supporters from across the organization, from the clinical side and from the commercial side and from the regulatory and from legal. So what I tend to believe is all about transparency. You need to be transparent. You need to be focusing on digital technologies that have enough clinical validation, because that will open up the discussion easily with the clinical side. And interestingly enough, we are at the stage where the proliferation of technologies that we have in our hands allows us to pick a few selected technologies that have enough clinical validation, so we do not necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. There is data there. And so focusing on these technologies that have good clinical validation is one thing. There are technologies out there that are FDA cleared and reimbursed in certain countries. So that allows the discussion to move further. But it's more difficult, and I haven't figured out everything.
So there have been examples of pharma sort of putting their toe in digital. Are there any recent examples that you've sort of liked, or you can sort of talk
Yeah,
about?
actually I have my favorite example, which I think it was a very risky move. It comes from another Japanese company, from Otsuka. I think that what they did, and think about when they started almost 5 years ago with the ingestible sensor that goes inside their product, which is for schizophrenia.
So the Proteus.
The Proteus, yes. Of course, last year they submitted, for approval to the FDA. The FDA rejected that, and just a month ago we learned the news that they resubmitted. So in my mind, I find this as a science fiction project, in a sense, that if it goes forward, it's going to be the first ever digital medicine. Can you imagine how powerful that is? And specifically for the patient population of interest, patients who suffer from schizophrenia. So that's one particular example that I admire what they did. And I'm also very interested in seeing what Sanofi is planning to do after announcing the collaboration with Science 37 in the area of virtual clinical trials. I think that we need to leave that traditional paradigm of the clinical trial design. We need to think more about our patients, where our patients live, how they live, and bring the trial into their houses. Because if we are dealing specifically in the area of the chronic conditions, we cannot apply an acute care model for chronic conditions management. That's enough just because many years ago some people decided that this is the standard of care, and many years ago some other people decided that this is like the gold standard of endpoints. That doesn't mean that it's golden. That doesn't mean it's
actually
valuable.
lead. Yeah.
Actually, it's the lowest thing that you have to cover as far as the criteria.
So I can think of Novartis and GSK doing some interesting things too. Would you agree that it really comes down to the highest level in the company really encouraging innovation, enabling innovation, really truly kind of pushing the whole organization to think differently?
Yes. That's a definite yes, because innovation should be seen as an integral part of the corporate strategy. It cannot be seen as an orbit that goes in the periphery of things. And only if it comes from the top, then some of these complicated challenges can be overcome a little bit easier. So one of the, based on my experience so far, the most critical component for successful implementation of digital innovation, it is very well related to the company's culture.
What do you think about the new FDA commissioner and the new digital health unit they're trying to build? What do you think the impact might be?
I'm super excited about that, and actually I think it's kind of hypocritical for pharmaceutical industry to say every time that we were thinking about digital solutions, to say, oh my God, but FDA will ever allow it? FDA is actually pretty open-minded compared to pharma in many occasions, and there are many startup companies out there who have approached the FDA, who have designed randomized clinical trials. They are going to have software as a therapy. So I think it's an excuse to say that FDA is not ready for this transformation. And just the establishment of the separate digital unit, I think it's a very clear message of where things are heading.
So the not so longer hidden elephant in the room for pharma is technology companies, right? Amazon, Apple, Verily. What's your thought about where's that going? What are your thoughts about just the interaction between them trying to come in?
So I think it's a class of giants here. We are experiencing for the very first time in our lives a very interesting paradigm. So there are some strong players, Apple, Google, with very deep pockets that they're trying to bring their innovative ideas into the healthcare space. In the healthcare space, it was primarily something that nobody else touches but the pharmaceutical industry. And unfortunately, the pharmaceutical industry created this heavily complicated environment in an effort to increase the barriers to entry, but now we're actually victims to what we have created. For product development, we need an excessive amount of money. We need lots of time, and the likelihood of success is actually pretty low. So it's not like we're having a business model that actually works well. So I think that we are running into a huge risk or opportunity for other industries to show us how to do things better.
Do you think tech can really show bio how to do things?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think some of the challenge when I think about this is if you talk to bio people, they'll tell you that biology is complex, silicon is and not as complex, that DNA they may consider just data, but that's complicated, and that in tech you can kind of experiment and go fast and break things, and usually nobody dies. So these are all the kind of things the bio people will say, and then the tech people kind of also talk about how glacial we are and how we kind of are not thinking in it. So I see there's a lot of need for kind of translation between, I think both of them live in their own silos and have a lot to learn from each other.
You're raising a great point there. I think, yes, they're both of them, they live in their own silos, and some efforts in the past of having these two representatives from pharmaceutical industry and from Google or Apple to work together didn't necessarily end up in the best possible way. There is definitely lots of lessons learned from the previous efforts, but it also comes down to the level of arrogance that both of these stakeholders bring to the game. I think that if they recognize the risk that exists and the opportunity for changing things for the betterment of the patient, because this is why we're making these discussions, how we can bring products to the market faster and make it accessible to patients. I think if they make their final decision being driven by serving the people, serving the patients, I think that they will find a way to start a meaningful dialogue. Where they are at the moment, I'm not very hopeful about. I'm not very optimistic, to be honest with you.
Okay. Now, I wonder if we can ask if anyone has any questions for us. Yes, I can just see. I don't know if you can turn up the lights a little bit. In the
You talked quite a bit, touched on the culture thing. I'd be interested in you guys' opinions about some of the best ways you've seen farmers of different sizes and complexions being able to bring it in. What are the models that have tended to be effective about bringing it in? Is it skunk works? Is it having it in different business units? You know, there's many different ways of bringing innovation to companies. I mean, it's obviously challenged that industry. I'm curious what it's worth.
Sure, I'll let George go first. I have my views on that.
Yeah, so I would like to hear your thoughts on that, because I'm definitely experimenting. So it has to do a lot with from where you're starting with, your starting point, because every company, it has its own culture. So it's not like let's sit with Google for a couple of days and let's see how we can transform our culture and learn from them. I don't think that's a very successful model. I also don't think that if you allow, let's say, to have yoga during lunchtime, or allow your dog to spend time with you at the office, this has nothing to do with culture. These are just perks. The culture is all about the risk level that as an organization you can take on. It's all about being reacting with a yes instead of reacting with a no, and think about solutions instead of blocking every new idea. Some models that I have seen is that in order to change the culture, you need to bring innovation throughout the company. You need, in a sense, to create small core teams where people with a specific mindset can embrace innovation a little bit faster, because that's the other thing. I think that it will be unrealistic for us to believe that everybody within a pharmaceutical company will become an innovative mind. And we do not need that. We need people thinking different ways for a reason. But those certain people who have that fertile environment of becoming a little bit more innovative minds, we need to just create a forum to allow them to communicate more often with like-minded people within the organization. And then with some external efforts, like doing hackathons, for example, learning from technology partners, but not necessarily trying to transfer their culture DNA to your company. And actually just being a little bit less arrogant and saying, yes, we're here to learn and we are open to this new world. Either this is digital innovation or something else.
So my answer to you would be the one way you don't do it, which is the commonest way that's done now, which is to have an innovation unit that's not funded very well. It sits in one corner, they really have no funding, and they have to persuade the internal stakeholders to sort of incorporate some new, shiny object into their latest programs. So I think that's a very common way of doing it, and I just don't think it works very well. So I think, I'm sure you've seen the TED Talks probably about how the educational system beats the creativity out of kids. I think about that, about industry, which is people in industry have a slide called the half circle of non-innovation. So in pharma, basically, if you do a program and you do completely what everyone else has done, you copy that, and you fail, it's okay. If you actually do new things and fail, you probably lose your job. And there's a very, very risk-averse culture, and I think people in pharma want, to be let their creativity out. It's just the structure of how it's been, very risk-averse. So the question is, can we either really retrain people, and I think many people would want to do that, to think in a way that's different to the traditional model, or frankly, you have to get whole new people who, come from other backgrounds to do that. I think it's possible to do it within the legacy, but it takes a lot of management willingness to actually do that. So that's my answer to that.
And if we could add one more thing, because you just made me think, and that was an excellent question, and thank you for that. So the big problem is also, first, budget is a very, very critical component, but then the second thing is that how we measure success within the company. If we measure success by performance or effort or by the final result, it will never help us foster innovation further. So what I'm trying to tell you is that innovation has a risk. I'm not sure if it has a higher risk than the traditional clinical development model, but has a risk that pharma companies are not willing to understand and calculate at the moment. But if we penalize people by including, let's say, specific technologies in the clinical trial, but the clinical trial does not go well, then how exactly are we going to foster an innovation and an environment of innovation? We should say, yeah, that was a great decision, that was a great study that you picked. Guess what? It didn't turn out well. It didn't. We didn't have the return on investment, but we learned something in the process. And I'm not sure that we're quite there yet.
No, the culture definitely isn't there for that. One more last question anyone has? Yep, we're here.
So how does this play into Pharma's corporate venture arms?
So the question is, how does this relate to the Pharma's corporate venture arms? Okay.
Okay. So I can give you my 2 cents on that. Because my background is more as a scientist, and in the digital innovation I do not have so much experience in the ventures part of the world, but I would assume that if a big pharmaceutical company has a ventures arm, typically they also have their own budget, and they can have a power to do lots of things, and they are doing it. I also feel though that budget is one of the things, but then again, whatever decision you make, it also has to be tied back to the corporate strategy, because sometimes some of these moves, they may use a certain evaluation criteria, but let's say the CMO of the company doesn't necessarily agree on that, or it doesn't bring the company to the level where somebody like me would like to see the company. So I think it all goes back to trying to bring down the silos within the pharmaceutical, within the company, and allow for some transparency while certain moves are happening. So one deal does not move forward, and the rest of the company doesn't know about it. It of course it introduces another level of complexity, because you have to persuade certain stakeholders, and that can be a very draining experience. But I think that for the ultimate best of the company.
So what I would say is, if you look historically, those venture groups have really invested in molecules and biotech, whereas now we see them invest in services companies, they're trying to reimagine clinical development, non-pill like electroceuticals. So those are kind of new for the venture groups within pharma, and I think that's a good thing, right? So one of the things I'll end up by saying is, it's fascinating to me, and I've always kind of been giving people a hard time about it, is if you were to tell the people in the tech industry that in pharma we actually spend 0 on the R&D and R&D. Most companies do not assess. So when we did a whole society I run, we tried to do a Cochrane on methodology of how we do trials. Well, you don't really have double-blind trials of looking at different methodologies, but the level of evidence of most of what we do, just doesn't exist. It's just opinion. So most of what we do in R&D has not been validated in any way, and yet companies spend 0 money on trying to improve the R&D, which is amazing when you think how much money we spend, utilizing those methods. So we're an industry where we really do not think to spend money on what we should, which is improving how we do things, which is why I think these outside companies, many small startups who are really experimenting with new ways of doing things, will be a great way to try and get away from the model that clearly is no longer working.
Yeah,
okay.
And actually that's also a great point, because I live in the startup world, so I can tell you that for the same clinical trial, there is a totally different price tag, and most of the times is even the double or more than that if the same clinical trial is happening in the traditional pharma space. Why? Why we cannot think a little bit more entrepreneurial? Why we overcomplicate things? Why we have to pay all that overhead? And actually, there is all this complexity right now and around pricing. So pricing becomes an issue, and it becomes a lot more of an important issue as we move forward. So if we do not find a way of streamlining our operations and doing things more efficient, then the traditional pharma model will vanish. And I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts about the future and what you are anticipating as the new pharma model. Are the traditional pharma companies will cease to exist sometimes in 10 years from now? And what would be the company of the future, the healthcare company of the future?
And that's the big question. I mean, I'm very optimistic, actually. I actually think that the new tech companies are not looking to tweak our model or to fit within the model, whether it's healthcare or drug development. They're really looking to build their own and go around. So I think especially with digital medicines, lots of treatments for chronic diseases that don't necessarily need a pill, we're going to find much cheaper ways of doing the regulatory work that we need. So I just think once those ways are shown to work, then everyone's going to kind of, pharma lemmings, right? They don't want to be the first, but once they see something work, especially if it's cheaper and more efficient, they'll go there. So I'm actually very optimistic that what the new tech companies can do is show us new ways of being at scale, recruiting at scale, implementing at scale. They're very good at implementation, and hopefully that will teach us how to do that in a much more cost-effective way, right?
Yeah.
Great.
I think you should look at the fintechs and the banks as a very similar example. The fintechs thought they were just going to take over and totally disrupt. It turns out there's like regulatory stuff, and there's COBOL code, and there's databases, and so they had to learn to play nicely.
Yes.
And it's actually happening faster than I thought now, where banks are innovating for the first time and realizing they've got to compete. And I think the same thing will happen with pharma, but I think they're even slower than banks.
They are, and ultimately, I mean, as I said earlier, you know, if you break stuff in healthcare, you may kill people. So there is a certain amount of conservatism which is appropriate. Yeah, I guess.
No, but you're raising a very good example there, because think about it. If we are willing to make financial transaction and send, hundreds of millions of dollars from one place to the other, and making sure, and we are certain that our money, whatever we send, $1 million, it will be transferred $1 million, and it will happen with 100% accuracy. I'm just asking here. I'm going to leave you with an open-ended question. What is the problem if I share my blood pressure? I personally do not have any problem.
There's no problem. I'm just talking about that, just in healthcare, people are worried that you may affect, you have an ineffective treatment being approved or whatever. Well, what I will say is I will answer that and connect the two together. I'll leave you with one word, which is probably the trendiest word of the year. And I hope you've all seen 10 YouTubes on this. If you haven't, do so. The big word this year is blockchain, right? Learn all about it, because whether it's fintech or healthcare, it's all going to be about the blockchain. It will solve all our problems, apparently.
Let's see about that.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to end there. Thank you.